Hello and welcome to Senior Speak New Hampshire on your Concord television station, sponsored by AARP. I am Karen Ulmer-Dorsch, the producer host of this program, and I thank you so much for being with us today. The past few months, as you know, we have been featuring a session about the walking trails around this wonderful city. And they're there available for everybody to enjoy. And I truly hope, viewers, that you have taken advantage of that and that you will continue to do so because they are open year-round. And we all know how terribly important it is to be out in nature for our good health and well-being. And speaking about health brings to mind caregivers and caregiving. Our former First Lady, Rosalynn Carter, said once, there are four kinds of people in the earth today, on this earth today. Those who have been caregivers, those who are caregivers, those who will be caregivers, and those who will need caregivers. As you think about that, I'm wondering, in which group would you see yourself currently? As for myself, I see me in that last group, those who will need caregivers, since I am in my 9th decade of life, and I've already needed some caregiving. Caregivers and caregiving is a major focus of AARP for the 50 plus. And one of the key questions that we will be asking our candidates who are vying for New Hampshire votes this midterm is this: how will you work to protect and expand resources, excuse me, for the 50 plus living independently, including their family caregivers, and increase the number of qualified home health workers so that more Granite Staters can continue to live independently at home. Thus, it seemed really very appropriate for me to invite my good friend and fellow volunteer Roger Derosiers to speak to us today about caregivers and resources for them. Roger has long been a caregiver, and he also is very active in keeping foremost this issue in the minds of our legislators. So without further ado, Roger, thank you for agreeing to be with us today and for taking time to inform us about caregivers. To start off, tell us a little bit about your experience as a caregiver, and then answer this question, exactly who are caregivers?
Okay. Thank you, Karen. It's a pleasure to be here and to talk about caregiving. Caregiving for me, and I have to say for my wife, started with the care that we provided my father, who was 80 years old when he came to live with us. He lived with us for about 17 to 18 years.
Wow.
And during much of that time, he was independent. But as you can imagine, as years went on, he became more and more in need of support.
Right.
So we were very happy to be able to do that. At the same time, during a year or two, my mother-in-law needed support and care after falling and breaking her hip, and needed some support. So we had both my dad and my mother-in-law together for several months at a time. So eventually she was able to get back to her home and get the support she needed over there. Another part of our caregiving experience happened to deal with a situation that doesn't always come up too often, but it had to do with my daughter and son-in-law. Unfortunately, my son-in-law came down with cancer and had a brain tumor and eventually succumbed to it. So my daughter and the two children that they had needed our support. And so we extended our caregiving support
Wow.
in different ways for her and the two children. So those are the personal caregiving experiences that I've had. And from that, it led me to information, or to obtain information about caregiving here in New Hampshire. And I was asked by AARP to serve on a commission for grandfamilies. Grandparents are caregivers, of course. And that's what I'm here to talk about today.
Right,
and
great.
I hope to talk about a variety of caregivers and to give basically an overview about caregivers, their needs, and of course the resources they need. And I'm going to try to focus a bit more on resources as we talk.
Good.
But the first part has to do with who are these caregivers. In my situation, it's somewhat what has been in past generations the tradition of families caring for families. And a lot of that goes on even today. So we want to acknowledge and certainly be emphatic in our an appreciation of all the work that families do for the individuals that need that within their families. So the family members, they could be adults, they could be adult children who are caring for their parents or other family members who need that kind of care, including people who have in their family people with disabilities or other illnesses.
Yes.
Or injuries. I certainly know of a person who had a car crash and survived it and seemed fine, but because of a brain injury, needed ongoing care. So the caregivers and their circumstances can be very different. And of course, there are people with mental illness, there are people with developmental disabilities. So this hopefully will give you an idea of who does caregiving and some of their conditions. So in terms of why we need caregivers, of course, the obvious thing here in New Hampshire is that we have an aging population, aging adults. We're one of the oldest states in the country.
The second, aren't we?
Oldest.
Because I think Maine is first.
That sounds what I recall too. And unfortunately, we have another cause, and that is the other epidemic that we don't hear so much about, but substance abuse.
Exactly.
Where it's left a lot of parents in need of support, and unfortunately their children in need of a lot of care. And unfortunately another problem area that has not gone away of physical abuse and neglect by parents. That leaves a lot of children in need of care, and grandparents oftentimes fill that particular role.
Right, and physical abuse, not just for children, but for adults.
For adults. Yes.
Yeah.
And I referred to them earlier, disabilities and illnesses and injuries. So
what do caregivers do?
Well, that's a good question, because they perform a lot of different roles. And of course, as you can imagine, it depends on the needs of the person they're providing care to.
Right.
But they can fill the parental role of being a parent to a child at times, maybe permanently until that child becomes an adult. They can fill a supportive role of finding resources for either the adult parent that they're caring for, or for the members of their family that suffer from illness, disability, or mental illness of one kind or other. They can perform other partial parental roles like childcare, which is pretty common, especially with the cost of childcare today.
I guess, my goodness.
They can provide routine and medical care that all children will need as they grow, and as adults need as well, as you can imagine, as they have chronic illnesses, and oftentimes when adults come home from a hospital or whatever, or just from a doctor's visit, the caregiver has to know what the medical regimen is. And they sometimes have to be trained to do that regimen.
Exactly.
I experienced that myself.
Yeah.
Through some training, I was able to determine a level of medication that my dad needed, for example. And then adult caregivers, they don't stop giving in the home when we'll say an adult parent goes into assisted living or to nursing care.
Right.
There's still a big need for managing the care that they receive in those facilities. And it can be financial management, it can be, just being there with them to, reassure them and to provide some comfort and companionship to them.
Exactly.
But it can be in the role of an advocate, because facility is a facility, and individuals may need something that an advocate needs to speak up for.
And that's so very important, because so often, because we live distances from,
Yes, from
that can be
facilities.
a real issue.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So now I'd like to speak a little bit about the challenges of caregiving and caregivers.
Great.
As you get into caregiving, if you're not already doing it, what you find is that it can be a continuous 24-hour, 7-day-a-week chore, depending on the needs of the individual. So that caregiver is got to find a way to preserve themselves, their own energy and their own resources, or they're going to fail
Absolutely.
at a time when they want to give the most. And so caregiving has this challenge, and the way to look at it is to recognize that a caregiver needs a support system. That support system could be from another relative who comes in, one day a week, or
Right.
whatever it might be, to just provide that break that caregiver really needs.
And that's so extremely important, because if you are a caregiver, you don't want to ask for help.
That's right.
That's
I mean,
frequently
people
the
often-
problem.
That's right.
And that is so detrimental to what you're attempting to do for the one you're giving care to.
Absolutely. People don't want to ask for help, but they definitely have to make that as part of their plan of
Oh,
caregiving.
definitely.
And, other relatives, while they may be supportive from a distance, they don't have either the characteristics or the willingness to provide care. So they can support in other ways.
Exactly.
It could be financial
Right,
support.
right.
Because as a caregiver, you're also looking at the needs of your needs now that you're, maybe having a child as part of your family.
Right.
So your needs have grown, perhaps quite substantially. And many of the caregivers are still working. So
Indeed.
they may need childcare, for example. So caregivers are in need of a variety of things. The legal services, for example, if they need legal authority to give a permission for a child to go to a school event, or just sign medical papers, for example. So there's a legal resource that caregivers definitely need.
Right.
And the other thing is that they need counseling and support for themselves, dealing with in a situation where they may be in a strained relationship with their adult children. If you think about, we'll say, an adult child who has substance abuse,
Right.
There's kind of a push and pull all the time, as you can imagine, where that adult child is maybe trying to recover but doesn't recover
Exactly.
adequately, and so the relationship becomes strained, and oftentimes it's really helpful to get the support and counseling of somebody who can help navigate through all of that.
Exactly.
So those are some of the needs, and there are many others that I'm not listing today because we could spend a whole program
Well,
just talking about this.
I want you to get through what you're doing, and then I have some questions to ask you.
okay.
So you just go ahead.
Okay. So I've mentioned some of the services that caregivers need and everything, and I just would like to add one more, and that's having timely information. As you can imagine, if you're in the midst of caregiving and a new development occurs, you can't feel comfortable waiting another 2 weeks to get the help that you might need. So getting timely information about medical care, about financial information, about we'll say, changes in that person's day-to-day health or needs and so on. So, there are many resources out there, and they never seem to happen, the moment that you need them.
Yeah.
And that's where some good planning comes in ahead of time, whenever you can do that ahead of time, because we know that's not always the case. But that's what a caregiver really needs, is that planning ahead, if at all possible, and then getting the timely information that they really need.
And that's where a caregiver can use the services of others who
Yes.
could be looking up that stuff and informing the caregiver, because frequently the caregiver, him or herself, doesn't have time
Exactly.
to do that.
Exactly.
So that's something some other family member or outside help could do.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it extends to friends and what we refer to as kin.
Yep.
People that are close but maybe not directly related.
Exactly.
So it's great to establish that team ahead of time and say, what could you do if I needed you to do this?
Exactly.
It could be running an errand, and it could be picking up a prescription, or any number of things that from time to time a caregiver can't break away and do.
Right.
So those are the kinds of things that informally can be so beneficial.
Exactly. Right.
So I think at this point, maybe we can talk about caregiver resources and talk about it in some sense at a high level, because if we get into every kind of caregiver resource, it could be a whole program by itself.
That's true.
But I'd like to talk about some specific services in the way of resources that are here available in New Hampshire, and then a few that are available at the national level, and I'll talk about that. Because caregiver resources, you never can have enough. There's no question about it, and you can't have enough close by to you as well. But on the other hand, through our modern technology, websites, and certainly other kinds of ways of getting information, we can access a variety of resources that are really available and can be very helpful. So the first one I'd like to talk about is the Kinship navigation program, because that is the closest thing to caregiving here in New Hampshire that will lead people to the right place that I feel is available. Because there are many other resources that are available, but they don't necessarily focus specifically on caregiving, and they are at times going to connect you to another program and not directly to maybe the source that you're looking for.
Right.
But the Kinship Navigator program has been established through the Department of Health and Human Services and the Children's Trust. And what they've done is use the family resource centers that are established throughout the state here, that are resources for families, just like it sounds like. But in the case of caregiver, they've also added a person who focuses on caregiving. So when you contact the Family Resource Center, you're going to be connected to somebody who's really trained and has expertise in guiding caregivers to what they need.
Okay. And we have a slide for that particular.
Yes, we do.
Good.
Yes. So I think this is it here, but I just want to elaborate a little bit more on what they do, because they just do much more than, we'll say, connect you to a resource. They do support the person who's in contact with them, because an initial contact could end up with a dead end, or maybe you don't know the right question to ask, or maybe the person's not in that day. So you need to have the support and the direction that a navigator can provide to you. In addition, they provide contacts even within a family resource center that can support you and your family. And as a result, you could have some ongoing connection to them and until you feel independent and able
Nice. Great.
to do what you need to do on your own,
Uh-huh.
which is a wonderful way to maintain somebody's independence and at the same time guide them towards the resources that they need. As part of the program, they collected some information over a couple of years ago, but I think a lot of it is still appropriate today. They're referring to 23,750 children under 18 that live in homes where a relative is head of household.
Wow.
So for viewers to get some kind of perspective of the scope of the, I guess, need here in New Hampshire. And 6,000 children live without a relative or no parent present. And then another 6,970 grandparents are responsible for their grandchildren here in New Hampshire.
Wow.
So it's a sizable number. And then there are 410 children that are in foster care. And we'll talk a little bit more about that situation. So I strongly recommend contacting the Family Resource Center in your community or going to the website that's part of our slide and contacting them if you haven't done so already to get more information that might be available in your community. And of course they can identify support contacts for you as well. So I think this is a great place to start if you're just starting, or even if you've been doing some caregiving, they may have some additional resources or information that will be of benefit to you.
Super.
So the next resource I'd like to talk about is ServiceLink. ServiceLink is a great resource, and they get into more of the various programs like Medicaid and Medicare and food stamps, etc., that are available to you and how to access them. Because like all of these resources, you have to either be eligible or at times many of them are free. The navigation program, Kinship navigation, is free, but many of these other programs are not. And so you can run into a difficult time if you're not expecting that, or if you don't know how to qualify. And so the ServiceLink folks can really connect you in a way that says, this is what I'm potentially eligible for, and this is the next steps that I might need to take, gathering documents, for example, and what to expect if you contact someone that has a resource that you might be interested in getting. Because as I mentioned earlier, many of the caregivers, they are either working or maybe they're fully retired and living on Social Security, and now they need a resource to care for that grandchild or grandchildren, or maybe an adult if there isn't sufficient resources for them. So this is where ServiceLink comes in and begins to direct you into a place where you can feel comfortable knowing ahead of time this is what's required. Okay, I'd like to move on to another resource, the CarePath resource. CarePath is actually a component of the Department of Health and Human Services in New Hampshire. And what CarePath tries to do is give you as it implies, a path to the resources that you might need. And depending on your circumstances, there are different paths that people might take. So if you have a problem with developmental disabilities, for example, they'll guide you through this resource to that multiple resources that are available to people with developmental disabilities, or people with mental illness, or substance abuse. It begins to help you find the resources for the person that you're providing care to. So, and many of these programs have supports for the caregiver as well. So you can learn from them the way to get services for the people that you care for, as well as the supports for yourself and services for yourself.
Good.
So I encourage you to go to CarePath and look at our listing and our website for the CarePath resources, information that you can get from them. Now, within the Bureau, within the Department of Health and Human Services, there's a Bureau of Family Assistance. And that bureau is focused primarily on providing financial aid to recipients. And so that's why I wanted to highlight this in this presentation, because depending on your circumstances, naturally, you could qualify. And I might add that the Department of Health and Human Services has modified a number of their programs within the department. It's a huge department, as you might know.
Right.
So they do for everything from A to Z, and as a result, you may qualify for a program within their department. So that's where CarePath comes in, and this is where also the Bureau of Financial Family Assistance comes in. So having highlighted, well, there's one more, or a couple more quickly that I'm going to go through in the Department of, in New Hampshire, in terms of New Hampshire resources. Department of Education. Because if you're a grandparent trying to get your child enrolled in your local school district, and they're coming from another school district, this poses some challenges that you want to contact, first of all, the local school district and make sure they have all they need from the former school district. It could be an IEP, it could be, you know, a progress report, any of those things. So that's one of the things. And through the Department of Education, you can find out what else that you might need in the way of vaccination requirements, or you know, information about what's available, we'll say statewide, as opposed to the local.
So I think we have time for one more.
Oh, okay. Let's talk about quickly national programs, because for veterans, the veterans who qualify can get caregiving services, and the caregivers can get services and support as well. So as I've indicated or implied earlier, you have to qualify.
Right.
But for veterans, it's well worth looking into.
Okay.
And AARP, of course. I know from looking at their proposals, they've got, you know, 2 pages of resources that will guide you to supports for the caregiver, as well as national resources for caregiving. And I would encourage you all to go to that as one more resource. And then I want to mention, just like all of the things that we've talking about, on a national level, oftentimes there are national programs for caregivers, whether it's for mental illness or developmental disabilities, substance abuse, or, you know, other kinds of needs that the individual might need. Arthritis Foundation, for example.
Right.
So at the national level,
so, Roger, I think our time has run out, but I do want to thank you. And as you can see, there is lots of information available for you if you just know where to look. And I can't thank you enough, Roger, for sharing that information with us. And viewers, please share it with those in your family and loved ones and everyone else who couldn't be with us today. And please, thank you again for being with us. And until our next time, when our focus will be on the midterms, be good, do good, be one. Thank you, Roger.
Thank you. Pleasure.